Series of Planning for Life webinars hosted by Pepin Academies Foundation. We're glad you could join us again today virtually and take part in this wonderful panel. And before I go any further, this event would not be possible without our sponsors, so I want to thank them. I want to thank our two event sponsors, RSA Consulting, and Guardian Trust. And I want to thank our panelist sponsor for today, Long and Associates. All three organizations, all three companies are fantastic partners and longtime friends of Pepin Academies. And we're incredibly grateful for their support and partnership in making this available to you for free. For those that have never been a part of a Pepin Academies event or are not too familiar with Pepin Academies, Pepin Academies Foundation, which is putting this event on, is a nonprofit 501c3 organization created to support all of the Pepin Academies campuses. And Pepin Academies are nonprofit, tuition-free charter schools located in Tampa, Riverview, and Newport Richey, serving students and their families with special needs, learning disabilities, and learning-related disabilities from 3rd through 12th grade. Pepin Academies also operates a job transition program for students aged 18 through 22 to teach life and work skills by partnering with several companies and civic organizations throughout the Tampa Bay region. And we're delighted to bring to you today's event. And with that, I will turn it over to one of our board members, Genesis Smith, to get us started.
Good morning, everybody, or afternoon. Thanks for joining us today. Just want to remind everybody we are having a conversation today. Hopefully these are some wonderful topics for you to start thinking about, but when you get in the mode of planning and you're ready to make some decisions, remember today is a conversation to get you started. It shouldn't be considered advice for your specific situation. So today we have joining us Doug Jackson, who is the Deputy Director of Stable Accounts with the Ohio Treasurer of State, and this office is responsible for the administration of Ohio's Stable program. Doug has been dedicated to the field of developmental disabilities, for 20 years, and he works with a passion to serve people with disabilities and their families. Doug's experience includes managing the services of a direct support agency, executive administration in Ohio's County Board of the DD system, and teaching human services classes at Wright State University. So thank you, Doug, for joining us.
Our next panelist is Travis Fincham, who's a board certified elder law attorney and is the managing partner of Special Needs Lawyers PA in Clearwater. Mr. Fincham specializes in Medicaid qualification for aged and disabled individuals, as well as special needs trust drafting and administration. His practice also consists of estate planning, probate, trust administration, and guardianship, with a special emphasis on helping families plan for a member with special needs. He also helps families plan for incapacity for alternatives to guardianship. Mr. Fincham serves as co-trustee of the Guardian Pool Trust, which assists disabled individuals in protecting their assets for use during their lifetimes without disqualifying them for much needed public benefits. And as I said earlier, we are thankful for Guardian Trust sponsorship and support through the years. Yolanda Goodwin was supposed to be joining us. She may be joining us late as she has had a conflict come up, and we will introduce her if she is able to join us. In lieu of that, I will introduce Genesis Smith, who, as I mentioned earlier, is one of our board members. She is General Counsel and Employee Relations Manager at Pepin Distributing and serves as the Chair of the Finance Committee on the board of the Pepin Academies Foundation. Prior to joining Pepin Distributing, Genesis was an Associate Trust Officer at Raymond James Trust, focusing on the administration of special needs trusts.
And then, of course, thanks, Don. Of course, we have Don Arrigo as well. He's our Director of Development for Pepin Academies Foundation, which ensures the support mechanisms are in place for the schools that span 2 counties. Prior to joining Pepin Academies Foundation, Don was the Florida-based Director of Strategic Partnerships at the Mechanic Center for Public Policy.
Thank you, Genesis. And I'm going to turn it over to you to get us started with our first question. And before we do get started, I do want to mention to any of our audience members, if you have any questions, feel free to type them into the chat, and we will try to get to them as best we can. This will be a robust discussion, and I'm sure you'll get a lot of your questions answered through the discussion portion of this, but we want to leave some time for Q&A, and if time allows, we'll try to get to all of your questions. So Genesis, back to you.
Thanks, Don. So Travis, if we could start with you, I wanted to maybe just get an idea of what are some of the conversation starters you have with folks who come to see you about special needs planning. And of course, it's very highly individualized, but what are some of the things maybe some of your clients aren't thinking about when they first come to see you?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I actually have done a couple of programs about this over at the Family Cafe, which is a statewide conference here in Florida on developmental disabilities. I did that topic on actually preparing for that first meeting with your lawyer. And I have a set of materials about that for people who want to be better prepared when they go to that first discussion. But after listening to the clients, one of the things that we have to kind of remind our parents about, if that's who we're dealing with mostly, is that they're so focused on their child with special needs, and that's rightly so. They need to do that. They tend to lose focus on planning for themselves and making sure that they're covered in the event that they have a crisis. It's kind of like back when we used to be able to fly in airplanes freely, and they do that pre-flight thing where they talk about putting the oxygen mask on. You got to put it on yourself first before you put it on your loved ones or your children, because if you're in crisis, we're now in a much bigger issue. So we want to do incapacity planning, have all of that, which I know is kind of for another discussion. But once we get the caregivers protected, then we can focus on the more vulnerable individuals. So then we start down the path of, well, what's going to happen when you're not here, and the kinds of things we're going to talk about today.
That's great. That's a really good point. A lot of people don't think about that. I probably wouldn't have started there. So thanks for bringing that to light. They tend to think exclusively about special needs trusts, which of course is just one planning tool, but are special needs trusts always the right tool, and how do they differ from other trusts?
Yeah, and you're right. There's been a lot of education about special needs trusts. So a lot of the families, they've heard about it. They know at least the basics. And you can, of course, find a lot of information about special needs trusts and a lot of this thing out there, on the internet. But it's hard to know, good sources, where to go to find good information. And so I tell people, go read and go learn as much as you can. And then when we sit down, maybe you'll have a little bit of a head start. But yeah, the special needs trust is kind of I won't say it's the traditional. I think the old plan before special needs trusts were really thought about was to eliminate our loved one with special needs and just leave the assets to somebody else, which is not a great answer, as we can probably expect. But I still have parents who come in and want to do that. They have 2 or 3 children, and one of them is special needs, and they say, we're just going to leave the money to one of the others. And I suppose that can work in some circumstances, but we tend to not recommend that, because really the focus and the real concern is about the one with special needs, and the other kids, not so much. They can maybe be on their own, or they'll have to kind of fend for themselves. So finding a way to structure it is really, I think, what we want to do. And the trust is kind of the best way. There's lots of different ways to do special needs trusts. And there's also, we need to keep in mind that there's a couple of different major categories of trusts. And the primary issue is kind of what's the source of the money. If it's the parents' money or grandparents who are going to leave money to this individual, that's a whole one set of categories of trust. But there's a whole other set when it's the beneficiary's money already. Like, for example, if they were to have an unplanned inheritance, well, we got to go down a different path for that kind of a plan. And or there's a lawsuit. A lot of times these conditions are caused by an accident or an injury, and sometimes there's lawsuits. There's other lawyers that sue people. I don't do that, but we know there's plenty of lawyers that do that. If they collect some money, then again, that's already the beneficiary's funds, so we would have to go down a different path. But the idea of all these trusts are to hold funds, to protect them for the individual. And then we can talk a little bit more about kind of the details of special needs trusts, but it's the idea of being able to leave something for an individual that they're not going to necessarily be in charge of. That, we can't have them in charge of it for probably several reasons, one of which is maybe they're just not capable of managing money. But on the other side of it, if they're going to be eligible for certain public benefits, they would not be able to be directly in control. So we want to put that framework in place to protect them.
Thank you so
Sorry,
much.
I forgot I was on mute.
Do that all the time.
Genesis, Yolanda was able to join us here, so I wanted to jump in and introduce her to the audience. Yolanda Goodwin is a financial representative with Northwestern Mutual here in Tampa, specializing in disability income planning, special needs planning, and long-term care planning. She serves as the financial planning representative for HCPS Resource Fair, Lighthouse for the Blind, Motions Adult Care, and several ABA therapy programs in the area. Yolanda, we're so delighted you're able to join us. Quick question for you before we turn back to Travis and Doug. Understanding that financial planning requires identifying individual goals, and of course, special needs planning itself is highly individualized. What are some of the considerations that you find your clients often don't consider when starting that process?
Great question. I think the first thing people don't consider is medicine, the advancement of medicine and the longevity of the life that that child or that loved one might have. You know, if a parent is in their 80s and they had a child that was diagnosed with Down syndrome, what they were told when that baby was born is completely different versus what's being told today. So helping people understand the time horizon that we have, not just for myself as the parent or the person supporting that individual, but the time horizon of the individual with the special needs. So what people think is often they're mostly worried about what's happening today, what's urgent, what's in the middle of, what's in the face of them. They put tons of resources into this person and they don't always do the planning for themselves. So when it comes to retirement planning and special needs planning, we have a conversation about flying. When you get on that airplane, the first thing you need to do is put your mask on first before helping others. So if I know that you have a time horizon of maybe 20 years before retirement, I know that we need to get to work, not just to make sure you can retire, but to make sure that your child, you aren't here anymore. There's something in place to replace that. So I think people don't think that way. People don't think about the income that they have as a parent. If I'm supporting this person, what happens if I become disabled? I came into this industry from working at Social Security, from working in disability claims, and what people don't think about is, you know, one person may have a disability happen, but what happens if two of us have one? So protecting our income is tremendous. Making sure we're taking those steps for our own retirement is tremendous. And then the most important question I ask is if you were gone tomorrow, who knows the care plan for your loved one?
It's great. Thank you so much, Yolanda. Travis, actually, let's go start with Doug here and get him involved in the conversation. Doug, you work specifically with Stable, which is Ohio's ABLE program. Can you tell us about what ABLE accounts are, how they work, and who can benefit from them?
Yeah, so I do work with Ohio's program, and it's a national ABLE program. But I just want to talk a little bit more generally about what ABLE accounts are. So ABLE accounts are an amazing tool that have only been around for nearly 5 years now. So it was a game changer for people with disabilities. Already, Travis and Yolanda have mentioned public benefits. Public benefits have a resource limit that an individual with a disability who's using those public services can only have $2,000 worth of valuable assets, cash, personal bank accounts, checking account. Otherwise, their eligibility for public benefits is jeopardized. So historically, before ABLE accounts were around, for amounts of money that were just going over that $2,000 or not tremendous amounts of money that might be protected in a special needs trust, just the regular day-to-day money, what an individual with a disability would do would be to do something they shouldn't do. They would hide it. You know, maybe that was under the bed mattress, so it wasn't in a bank account and not counted. Yolanda talked about working in a public benefits office. It's not something that's reported when somebody does that. But we knew whether you work at Social Security or Medicaid, we knew that that was happening. It's that it couldn't be proven, and that's not the right way to handle things. Another way that it was handled was to spend it down. If you had nearly $2,000, you would go out and just buy something to reduce that balance and keep it far below the $2,000, because the public benefit that you're receiving, whether it's supplemental security income, SSI, or Medicaid, that was so valuable that you couldn't risk losing it. So you'd go out and spend down money buying something you don't need to keep your asset limit very low. But with an ABLE account, you can now save that money in a protected account. And that's exactly what ABLE is. It's a protected account that the person with a disability can access, or if they don't have the capacity to manage that account themselves, someone else can manage it for them, but the money is still the person with a disability's own money. It's an account that's in their name. And when you go to a public benefits appointment for eligibility, they'll say, do you have an ABLE account? You can say yes. And you can show the balance that's in that account, and that balance doesn't count towards the $2,000 limit. So it's another tool in the toolbox. Is Travis and Yolanda and myself talk today. It's really about what tools are available, and this is one of those tools.
That's excellent, Doug. Thank you for that information. So when we're thinking about planning and the different tools in our toolkit, we've talked about trusts, and now we've introduced this new tool that we have with these ABLE accounts. You know, is there a dividing line? Can you use both? A lot of people think that you have to be wealthy in order to fund a trust. Travis, how do you sort of manage the balance between the two? Do you recommend both? Is there a strategy for using both, or is it kind of a one or none?
Yeah, it's a great question, and the answer is we want to use all the tools that are available. And having ABLE added into our quiver has really given us a lot more options. And there's really some real creative ways we can use ABLE accounts as well that kind of Doug and I can maybe talk a little back and forth on. But yeah, the special needs trust, though, many times is still going to be necessary because, again, depending on source of the funds and the amount of the funds, you know, there currently is still a limit as to how much you can put into an ABLE account on an annual basis. And so if we've got an inheritance that's already coming to a beneficiary and it's more than the limit, then we've got to look at one of these other kinds of trusts. And the nice thing with in the special needs trust world is, again, if it's the beneficiary's money directly, there's a specific set of rules that apply. And for those kinds of trusts, we have kind of two different ones. There's an individual trust for the individual, which means that we have to draft a trust specifically custom for that individual. We have to find a trustee for that individual, which that can be a little more expensive, and it's more planning that has to go into that. As an alternative on the special needs trust side, we have something called a pooled special needs trust, kind of like a swimming pool. What that is that there's a common trust document that multiple beneficiaries use. So you have one trust with a lot of beneficiaries, and because the trust is already in existence, it's usually already been vetted through the government agencies. They've already checked it out, made sure it's okay, it's green lighted. It's a lot quicker and easier to establish. So for smaller amounts of money, and that's a relative figure, I don't know what necessarily small is to some people, but we have to realize that many of these programs, like Doug just mentioned, the SSI program, Supplemental Security Income, and our Florida Medicaid programs, like our Medicaid waiver that serves individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities, they have a $2,000 resource limit. I mean, that's not much at all. So if you're going to leave more than that to an individual so they don't have to go through that spend down, like Doug was mentioning, or hide it, you got to maybe think about one of these other options. And so again, if it's, say, a smaller amount, the $15,000 per year annual contribution right now to a pool trust, I know there's a little bit of exceptions to that if the individual is working, but $15,000 is a lot of money. And so if it's up to that amount, I would normally be looking at steering toward the ABLE account, provided they qualify. And I'll let Doug kind of talk about, you know, what some of the specific eligibility criteria are. But some of our folks might not qualify just from a disability standpoint from when they became disabled. And so then we've got to look at one of these other trusts. But a pooled trust is a lot more cost effective. Many of them don't have minimum fees. You maybe look at like a $500 fee to establish. That's what ours is. The Guardian Pooled Trust is a $500 enrollment fee. And then there's a percentage that you pay on an annual basis for administration, but you have a professional trustee, money manager doing all that. And so for smaller amounts, which smaller may be less than $100,000, $150,000, we might be looking at a pooled trust. If it's a larger amount, then we might look at the individual trust book, because you have options then. And then you have a lot of choices for trustees if you've got enough money. And so the more money that's there, the more options you'll have. And Yolanda can talk to us about how to have more money there when we need it.
Well, I want to actually turn to Yolanda and Travis on this next question. How often are your clients utilizing ABLE accounts in planning strategies, and have they found success with using them? And we'll start with you, Yolanda, on that question.
So I run off of a different philosophy.
Okay.
And I feel like when I meet people, often there are so many things that aren't done yet. I don't find myself recommending the ABLE accounts just yet. Often it is finding the right person for it, because not everybody's the right person for it. It depends on, and I hate to talk about it sometimes because it's a little bit of a rabbit hole for a family that has a person over 18 years old that doesn't have enough saved in their case. So typically I'm talking to people more about making sure they have enough life insurance, making sure they have enough saved. But the ABLE account is absolutely the right thing for the right person. It didn't used to exist, and what it can do for a family is mind-blowing compared to what it used to be like in the world of SSI. So for me, I actually haven't recommended any of them. We talk about them often, but there are just so many other things that I haven't gotten to actually setting them up yet.
And as far as my experience, I have helped a lot of clients. First off, I've recommended a lot of clients do it, and they can go do it. I'd be interested in Doug telling us kind of how the process for opening them at the stable. But I have actually helped individuals in my office. Just pop up the big screen and the computer, and we open the accounts right there. I have opened an ABLE account for my own family members who qualify for the ABLE account. So I've had a lot of experience with opening them. And then on our trust administration side, we have a lot of experience in working in tandem with ABLE accounts, because the Social Security rules have been written to really treat ABLE accounts very favorably. We can actually transfer assets from special needs trusts into ABLE accounts, which can actually, when it's done in a manner, it can actually help to maximize benefits that an individual might be receiving. ABLE accounts are treated so much more favorably, even in special needs trusts. And again, I know Doug can kind of tell us how some of the benefits of an ABLE account over a special needs trust, but I think that they work great when they're working in tandem. But Yolanda's right, you've got to find the right person who can qualify for an ABLE account. Pretty much anybody can qualify for a special needs trust of some sort or the other. And so, again, depending on whether we're talking about the parents planning the inheritance for the child, that's one discussion. It's a totally different discussion if that child already has some money or they're coming into some money and we've got to protect it. I think in both cases, you could explore the ABLE account too, but the special needs trust works great. I think it works at its best when it's working in tandem with an ABLE account.
Doug, and that leads to the next question. What are some of the benefits of the special needs trust versus the ABLE account? What did you find in your experience where one makes more sense for the individual more than another?
Yeah, and I appreciate both Yolanda and Travis pointing out some of the usefulness of the ABLE account, and that it's not for everybody. Because as I talk about it, having served people with disabilities for a lifetime, I agree. It's for people with disabilities that meet the qualification for an ABLE account, which is the onset of a disability prior to the age of 26. That is somewhat limiting right now. You don't have to be under the age of 26 to open an account or to use an account, but the onset has to occur prior to the age of 26 for that ABLE account to be used. Now, there's some legislation that's been proposed to increase that age of the onset of the disability, but right now that's where it's at. But then as we look at the tools working together, that's really using whatever is available to your advantage. And here's two tools. You know, if you're going to do a job and you have two tools available to you instead of one, I would pick them both up, right? And use them both to get the job done. So oftentimes I'm asked, which one should I have, a special needs trust or an ABLE account? My answer is yes. But again, it comes down to really evaluating what the needs are. Where is the money coming from? The person with a disability, if it is their own money and it's in amounts less than $15,000 a year that you're trying to protect, An ABLE account is very cost effective, more cost effective than a trust. But again, complementing each other. That's not saying, well, okay, now I'm going to go with an ABLE account because it's cheaper. No, it exists for the purpose of protecting that person with a disability's money or money that's being gifted to them. But again, we go back to that limitation of $15,000 per calendar year that can go into an ABLE account. So by the nature of that limitation, if you have more money, then a trust is going to be necessary. So another reason for the trust. But as Travis was pointing out, the complementary workings of the two tools together, a trust can fund an ABLE account. So if you're looking at the planning, the long-term plan, and you sit down with a family and parents' money, the generational wealth is going to be left for the child with a disability, you could look to a trust for the place to protect those funds, but then the ABLE account for the spending vehicle of the trust. So taking money out of the trust, transferring it to the ABLE account, and then spending it out of the ABLE account allows for some access to the funds that they wouldn't necessarily have directly because of the trust and going through a trustee to gain the funds. So you provide access to the funds coming out of the trust, broader spending power. A trust is typically not going to be used to purchase food and housing because that would have a negative impact on the person's SSI and Medicaid. So we look at taking money out of the trust, putting it into the ABLE account, and then spending it on food and housing. That is a tremendous value of the two tools working together because you've broadened the spending power of the trust by complementing it with the ABLE account. So really, again, just goes back to the common theme that all three of us presenters are talking about, and that is the two tools both exist separate from each other, but they also are very complementary to each other.
A couple of audience questions that I think segue well into this topic right here. The first one being, do ABLE accounts allow for investing, like through index funds, or is it just a savings account? We'll start with you, Doug, and anyone else that wants to answer that.
Sure, there are some investment opportunities built right into an ABLE program. Now, each ABLE program across the country handles that a little bit differently, although there is some commonality between them as well. So I'm going to answer this question from the stable account perspective. Again, an Ohio administered plan available nationally. Florida also has a plan called ABLE United that's available to only Florida residents. It's not a national plan, but it would be available to those residing in Florida. But ABLE accounts have built-in investment opportunities. The stable account program has 4 Vanguard mutual funds ranging from conservative to aggressive on the mix, the ratio of stocks to bonds. And then we also have one savings option that's FDIC insured, much like a savings account. So we allow people to make a choice as to what they would like to do with their ABLE account. Do they want to invest it and have it in the market? The market has been doing very well, but we always say the past performance doesn't predict the future performance. So people have been excited about the returns over the last several years, but we can't guarantee those forever. So those options are built in and do allow people to invest.
And I can talk specifically just briefly on Florida's ABLE United, because that's what I participate in with my daughter. And yes, you have, I think you have a few more options, and they do charge an investment fee depending on what you do, but it's basis points. You know, if you're having Vanguard, I think is one, and BlackRock, I think was their other investment manager. If you choose to have it sitting in cash, they don't charge an investment fee. But if you want it to be invested and managed, and again, you can get pretty aggressive with it, or you can keep it in cash, but you do charge, they charge a little bit of a investment fee. But other than that, there's no annual fee. They waived their enrollment and their annual fees. So it's very hard as a professional trustee to compete with that because you know, we got to charge fees for the services we provide. The other thing that I would mention as one of the big differences is that ABLE accounts were granted tax-free growth ability, which we can't do that in special needs trusts either. And I know I saw one of the questions had to do with some tax issues, but I think that's certainly one of the other great advantages of the ABLE account over the special needs trust, is that as long as you use the funds for certain qualified disability expenses, which are all kind of defined by the tax code, the money in the ABLE account can grow tax-free, like an educational savings plan. If you've ever thought about or looked at a 529 plan for for a child. This was modeled right after that. It's basically a 529 educational savings plan that doesn't have to be used for education. It can be used for other things. And so having that tax-free growth nature to it is a great benefit too.
I would add that we always have a conversation about suitability before we open any account. We want to look at what is the intention or the goal of this account, and whether or not the things that the items or the assets we invest in it are aligned with our goals. We're looking at whether those fees are aligned with our goals, if those fees contradict what we're doing. So there are things that you can do, but we always want to make sure that it's aligned with our goals and it's going to make sense in the overall plan.
What would be considered taxable income? You mentioned there are some exceptions that enable you to transfer funds out of the ABLE account tax-free, but what would be some instances where it would be taxed? Or
for an ABLE account, as Travis had said, a qualified disability expense, which is defined in the ABLE regulations in the tax code. What that definition actually is for the person with a disability that owns the account. So even if the parents are managing the account for their child, it would be the child's account. The expenses have to be for that person with a disability and help to improve or maintain the health, independence, or quality of life. And that is a very broad definition. We actually have a hard time finding what doesn't fit within that definition.
Okay.
So anything that would be taxed is something that's not spent on the individual that owns the account or doesn't meet the health, independence, or quality of life. So typically what we find is the only example we can come up with is spending the ABLE account on somebody that doesn't own the account. That would be taxable income at that point, and it would be taxed on the portion that was earned through the investments that wasn't taxed otherwise. You would be paying taxes on those earnings plus a 10% penalty. But we haven't seen that yet. We're happy that the definition is so broad. It was written into the code. It says intentionally broad to serve the needs of the person with a disability.
And I just wanted to also clarify, we weren't talking about transferring the funds out of the ABLE account into the special needs trust to then spend through the trust. I was only referring specifically to funding the ABLE account from the special needs trust, because I think you start running into some of those issues if you do it the other way, because you're taking tax-free money, potentially putting it into a taxable type account. And I think you run the risk of jeopardizing that tax-free benefit of the ABLE. So it's really transferring funds from one of those special needs trusts into the ABLE account to then be spent through ABLE.
Genesis,
Yeah, and I'm
going to turn it back to you for a next question for Yolanda.
Sure. And I was just going to totally in my days as a trust officer, I had a beneficiary who benefited from the ABLE account. He already had a trust that was established with funds from a settlement medical malpractice issue. And so that was where some larger funds were kept, but he had the ability to work a small part-time job and he earned a little bit of income. And so we used some, if you will, seed money from the trust to establish an ABLE account for him. And then he was able to deposit his earnings into that ABLE account and have access to those funds on a regular basis without having to call me up every time he wanted to go to the movies or go out to eat or something like that. He had his ABLE account available to him for those day-to-day purchases where he didn't need to involve his trust officer for those sorts of decisions. And it was a great way for him to access money while sheltering it from being counted against him for his public benefits. And it was a great tool. It worked very well in tandem, as you all pointed out, using all the tools in your toolbox and making sure that the circumstances merit having those accounts at your disposal, as Yolanda's pointed out. So with that, I would like to turn back to Yolanda and ask, we've discussed some of the estate planning strategies, but what are some of the ways that families can help fund these tools, right? Because we got to put money in them, right? So how can we fund these and grow and some more meaningful support for the future?
Sure. I'd argue that the most efficient way to fund a trust is with life insurance. Theoretically, most of the people that we're talking about have someone who's supporting them financially, and they're able to support them. And it's only if there was no income that person would no longer be supported. So when it comes to, a lot of people think, well, we could always just throw some money into the market. We look at the return that you would get on the effort. So if it would take you $10 to put money into the market, how much return would you get on that $10 at the end of your lifetime versus $10 you could put away for a period of time on life insurance? $10 of life insurance for a healthy young person is $100,000. So it's helping people visualize their money and understand how money works. Life insurance is also tax-free, which is something that most investments are not. So your way to transfer wealth easy and efficiently is done that way. But what tends to become the problem is figuring out the right combination. So we often have a conversation first about, what's the right amount? What is this particular individual, what are they going to need? After we figure out what it is that they're going to need, we're looking at what else needs to be taken care of. Is there debt that still exists? Is there a mortgage that we could pay off to make sure that this person has somewhere to live? Are there other children? Are there other people that also would benefit from having life insurance? So we're trying to figure out what's the right combination. If the parents aren't healthy, who else in the family could we do this policy on that would make sense? If they passed away, it could fund this trust. Beyond figuring out the amounts, we also look at what's the right type of insurance. You have term life insurance, which is, think about renting. It's a period of time that you're going to have a policy in place. Those policies could be level, where you're paying the same exact amount for a period of time until it expires. Or it could be an increasing amount where every year it goes up a little bit. And then as you get closer to your mortality age, 50, 60, it becomes more expensive. But we're always looking at what's the right combination of these. Is it whole life insurance, where whole life is something that it does cost more upfront, but what ends up happening is it never terminates. So it's something like buying a house. You're able to keep it forever once you pay that payment period. But beyond that, it also has equity that builds inside of it, which people call cash value, or the accumulated cash. So when we look at the overall grand scheme, we're trying to figure out if this child is young, they're going to need more than $1 million, because this child might live until they're 80 years old. So we're trying to figure out how much insurance can we get. Does it make sense to do term and permanent? Does it make sense to do a joint policy on the parents, where we have a policy where you could pick up whole life, both parents are insured or both individuals are insured. One person passes away, nothing pays out. When the second person passes away, then the cash pays out and funds that trust. So we do a lot of life insurance, I'd say, in the case of funding trust. And then I would also argue to get the process of getting your own life insurance started first, at the same time as having the conversation with your attorney. But what we don't want is that you go through the process with the attorney, you set up the trust, you pay the fees to get that done, and then your health changes and you don't have something in place to fund that trust the way that we had hoped for. So we always try to get this done as soon as possible, finding the right amount as soon as possible, freeing up those dollars as soon as possible. Because once we find a person is uninsurable, or maybe it's tobacco and it makes the rates too high, it's very difficult to find something. So I urge everybody to always be having this conversation to understand the tax-free benefit of life insurance versus other types of investments or assets that don't transfer tax-free.
Yolanda, that is a great suggestion. Speaking to that, that tool of life insurance, do you often have, or do you recommend to clients using something like charitable gift remainders, or charitable remainder trusts, or charitable gift annuities, or any type of charitable tool to further benefit, whether it be an institution that has been a great source of help to the child or to the through their lifetime? How often do you see that happening, where they're able to involve some sort of a charitable give back out of that life insurance plan?
I would say it's not that common. I think most people don't necessarily have the excess capital, but I would argue more it's just that people don't realize that that option exists. Especially older people, as they're getting into retirement, that's a great place to start having that conversation of where are the assets that we could transfer and find ourselves a better tax break. But people aren't just really educated, I think, on all the different tools that exist. The annuity is a great option for the right person.
Sure.
It can be a really great option, finding people tax favorability, having regular income that flows into that trust. But it's always for the right person. And typically they're going to be a wealthier person, or someone in the family has something else that they're able to utilize or leverage in that case.
Thank you. Thanks for answering that question.
Yolanda, circling back real quick to insurance, this is one of the questions that came through. Can you do a disability policy as well, so that if the parent becomes disabled, he or she can still support the child?
That's essentially just disability insurance. It's not that it's particularly intended to support the child. It's only intended to replace your income. So typically your employer may offer you 50 or 60% at work. Usually that's going to be a taxable benefit. So you might get, depending on your income tax bracket, 30 to 40% of that. So what people will do is purchase their own policy in addition to that, to get their income up to something where more like 75, 80% of their income. Purchasing your own disability insurance allows you to have a tax-free benefit. So when you're actually collecting, it's tax-free dollars. It's not that you have to use that on the child, but it's just money that exists to supplement what you lost. I would add the life insurance policies have a feature called a waiver of premium, or a premium waiver. And what that is essentially it's an add-on feature, but what it does is if you did become disabled, that is a feature that would allow you to, the company typically takes over the premium so that you're not having to lose your benefit. And if you have, many companies will take that policy, they'll convert your term into whole life. Now you have essentially a benefit that someone else is paying for you, and the cash still belongs to you that you can use and leverage in your own planning. And that basically allows you to create your own, almost your own retirement pool of dollars out of a disability.
Wonderful. There was another question in there, and I'll open this up to all the panelists. You mentioned that trusts are typically more expensive than ABLE accounts. Can you give an example of the type of expenses associated with trusts and what on average they would be?
I'll start with it, and then
Thanks,
please, Doug and Yolanda, chime in. But it's going to vary. I hate to always give that answer, but like I was talking about, if you're actually getting a custom trust drafted for a beneficiary, where you're selecting your own trustees, the trustee then has to get its own investment advisor. You got those costs, which are totally separate from just establishing the trust itself. Again, depending on the source of the funds, if we're talking about the parents setting up a trust in their estate plan for their child, it's going to sometimes be wrapped into their existing plan. It may not even come into effect now. You can actually embed a trust like this within a will that just kind of comes to life after the person passes away. You could also go ahead and set one up now, have it ready to go, and then, like Yolanda's saying, that could be a beneficiary of life insurance policies, that could be a beneficiary under a will. That's the kind of trust you could tell all the rest of the family about, the extended family, and say, hey, if you want to provide something for Lillian, here's where you do it. Here's how you make the beneficiary on any of your insurance policies. We'll even take retirement accounts if we have to. There's all kinds of ways to fund. That's going to be a little bit more. I mean, in my area here in the Clearwater and in the Tampa area, we're in probably the $1,500 to $2,500 range for a trust like that. But that's just to get it established. And then you've got to say, okay, well, who's going to be in charge of it? And maybe it's mom and dad for now. Maybe it's a sibling, later on. But are they really qualified? Are they really capable of managing money for a person? So you've got potential trustees fees, which can depend basically on the size of the trust. It's usually, I would say, anywhere between 1 and 2.5% to 3% per year is what you could expect probably from a trustees fee. That may or may not include the investment fees as well. So if you have an investment advisor who's handling it, you got to look at that. So that's kind of some of the costs of having a trust. You can minimize that some through that pooled trust we were talking about, where all of that is included in, you don't have to pay a bunch of money to establish it. It might be $500 to open the account, but then after that, the annual fee, which might be 2.5%, depending on the size of the trust, but that includes the trustee's fee, that includes the money manager's fee. So all that is wrapped together, and you'll probably have lower fees going that route than trying to get someone interested in a single trust. Even if you have a pretty good amount of money, if you go with $150,000, a financial advisor may say, yeah, I can do that, but it's going to cost me probably a little bit more time and energy than I want to spend on an account that small. So sometimes those fees can be higher if you do them on your own, as opposed to in the pooled environment. So that helps to keep the costs down.
Yes, we have that conversation of the cost of paying for a trust. And honestly, it's a conversation of budgeting most of the time. There are dollars, we have to find them. Sometimes it's dollars that that go to Wawa and Dunkin' Donuts. Sometimes it's dollars that, we thought was something else that was a priority that maybe is less of a priority today. We talk about rallying the troops. Who else is in your corner that can help you with this? If a person has someone who is collecting SSI and they're under 18, they can't save that money necessarily in one account. So they are put up against the wall of how am I going to collect it all at once? So we're going to have a conversation with an attorney who will accept installments. But I do sit in those conversations with the attorneys to help navigate that when they come into that conversation. I don't want a client to tell them that, like, I just can't pay for that. We're going to find those dollars and we're going to work on it until we do.
And possibly saving it in the ABLE account to be able to pay. Because again, if they've got to accumulate a little bit and you're worried about getting over the $2,000 figure, Doug made such a great point, rather than spending down and wasting it, and then as soon as you buy another big screen TV, that you didn't really need because you were over the limit, a dental expense is going to come along or something that's not going to be covered, and now you're in kind of crisis mode. So having an ABLE account in there to just to be able to save a little more. $2,000 is a figure that was designed at one time to be a person's 6-month reserve funds. That's when the law was passed. That's where the 2,000 came up with. If you imagine if we had a 6-month reserve fund now, it would be significantly more. In fact, I think that they're in the $13,000 to $15,000 range is what they're talking about. So they've never just adjusted that figure. So 2,000 is not much. So the ABLE is a great place to park it until you need it.
And it is, again, they're totally different tools intended for different purposes. So when you compare costs, it's not really fair in the cost comparison. But oftentimes I get asked, well, how much does it cost to have an ABLE account? And the cost is very minimal, and different programs handle that different ways. Some programs have no costs up front. Some charge for some different services that they would offer. The Stable Account program charges $3.50 per month to have the account. That's the full cost that comes with a loadable debit card that allows you to spend money out of the account on that debit card, control the amount of spending because it's loadable. So if a parent is managing the account, the debit card can be managed by the parent and only placing so much funds onto the card so that the child with a disability can still go out and spend with their very own card, but have some controls over it so they aren't spending the balance of the entire account. So that loadable card's a nice feature. It comes at no additional cost with the Stable Account. Each account's a little bit different for an ABLE account across the country, but they are all anywhere from $0 to $5, very small amounts of money to open an ABLE account. But for the purpose of typically saving smaller amounts of money than a trust and managing it differently because a trustee is not in place. So great value to a trustee not being in place when you're talking about empowering a person with a disability, but there's also liabilities because the person with a disability has access to those funds. And, sometimes a trustee is a very good way to manage the account.
Thank you, Doug. Another question from the audience. Can we place a property in a special needs trust? And how about income producing rental properties? Are you able to place those in special needs trusts?
Yeah, the short answer is yes, you can, except for maybe a pooled trust. Because remember when we were talking about what the pool is, it's a common one document and people open up sub accounts within there and it's being managed by a money manager. So usually you're not going to be able to have unique assets in there because they want to have one, control over how it's invested in the return, because that affects the entire pool, but also just from a liability standpoint. So usually we would have to carve out real estate into separate trusts. But certainly if a parent has invested, and one of the things they've invested in is income producing property, and they want to leave some of that to their special needs family member, having that in a trust is absolutely permissible. Remember, whatever's in that type of a special needs trust, there's no limit on the value. There's no limit as to how much can go in. There's no Medicaid payback when it's a parent, again, setting up a trust like that for an individual with the parent's money. So you can have unique assets. We have some with, a lot of them with real estate. We have some with mineral rights. I mean, some of our trusts are holding, oil rights in Texas and Oklahoma and all around. And so you can have unique assets in an individual trust for sure. You just got to make sure your trustee is willing to manage it and is capable of managing it and handling unique assets. And like Genesis was saying when she worked in the trust department, and I know, these major big trust departments, they have departments, they handle all kinds of stuff, whether it's real estate and mineral rights and things like that. So yes.
Piggybacking off of that, perhaps it's the fundraiser in me, but I have another question related to the charitable giving aspect of it. Are there donor advised funds available for special needs families, or are either of these trusts or accounts able to be converted into a donor advised fund where they'd be able to manage where their money goes end of life giving?
Yeah, I can address that. The short answer is yes. I mean, and you can do, and I have a feeling we're going to probably be seeing more of this. My part of this part of practice with irrevocable trust, with life insurance and charitable remainder, charitable lead trusts, that kind of waned as the estate tax thresholds went up substantially. But as now we're looking at the real possibility of the federal government scaling that back substantially, we're going to have people with estates that are going to be subject to an inheritance tax if they were to pass away. And so they're looking to minimize that. Obviously, if they have a special needs family member, they're probably still going to want to primarily provide for that individual, but I think you can do both. You can use the charitable either remainder or lead trusts to get out from under some highly appreciated assets like real estate and stock that maybe you want to diversify, but the taxes would be too substantial if you were going to sell it. By placing it into a tax exempt trust, you can then liquidate a piece of property or stock and not pay the tax. And then you just got to figure out, what am I going to do with that money? Am I going to use that money, like for Yolanda's purpose, am I going to use that maybe to pay an income stream back to me that's going to help fund a life insurance policy, where maybe that stock I had was a Tesla that doesn't pay a dividend. And some of these stocks that have, Tesla goes up and down, but there are some people who have stock that doesn't pay dividends. And so if you want to get an income stream from it, you can use one of these tax exempt trusts to free up the cash, use the income stream to purchase life insurance. You can also, again, you do it the other way around. It stays in this trust for my loved one now, but then upon their passing, it's going to go, the remaining funds would go to my charity of my choosing, and you can actually get a current income tax deduction depending on how all that is structured to be able to do that. So I think we're going to see a lot more of that as the federal government maybe scales back the estate tax thresholds, because we're looking today at an individual has to have about a little over $11.5 million before they're going to pay estate taxes. It wasn't that long ago that figure was 600,000. So I mean, I was helping people, back in the mid 90s, and it was a $600,000 threshold. And so where it's going to come back to, we don't know, but I think it's going to open that market up even more.
Thanks for that great answer, Travis. We really appreciate it. I know our audience does as well. Genesis, I'm going to turn it back to you for our final question for Yolanda, and then we will wrap things up so people can get back to their days.
Thanks, Don. Yeah, so there's a lot to consider. There's a lot of different tools that we have in our toolkit for sure. So once we figure out what we want to do and what tools we're going to use, we have our plan. We can just set it and forget it, right? Yolanda, Travis, maybe even to some extent, Doug, how often should families be reviewing these plans, and to Doug, you know, is there a review period with Able accounts? How often should we look at these things and make sure, and what should we be checking for when we review?
I'll go first. For a financial advisor, we're meeting every 6 months to a year. For a family with special needs, arguably it could be when they need it, because things change or large expenses come up. But kind of to Travis' point, when the tax laws are changing over time, circumstances are changing over time, you can't set it and forget it, because it may not continue to align with what you're hoping for. So we're always getting back together, making those adjustments, looking for, you know, other ways to find greater levels of tax efficiency. We're looking for any other gaps that are opening up, essentially. But I would say that understanding market conditions sometimes is helping coach people through what's happening right now. So once or twice a year.
Which is probably a little more frequently than you're going to get back together with your lawyer to review your estate plan, but it could happen. And so the laws do change and necessitate, you know, when Able came in about 5 or 6 years ago, it was kind of a game changer that kind of, I think, required people to get back in and kind of relook at their entire planning. But I also tell my clients that probably more often than the law changing is something's going to change in their lives and in their family in particular, because it's often that they come back in. It's only been a few years since they did their documents and they're going, I don't know what I was thinking by putting so-and-so in charge of things. They're totally not capable of doing that. But sometimes it's something has happened, you know, there's been another crisis in the family, or they saw how that person dealt with another issue, and they're like going, oh, I don't really want them handling my affairs anymore. So, and also, you know, anything could happen, incapacity, death of someone. So anytime we tell people, if anything happens to anybody who's named in your documents, you want to review them. And hopefully we've planned for that contingency and you don't have to redo documents, but it's a good idea to look at it. But aside from that, you know, every couple of years, 2 to 3 years is probably not bad. Probably a little more often, like Yolanda's saying, for this population where we have a special needs child, as opposed to my easy ones where the parents have, you know, 3 kids, the kids are all grown, have their own families, and there's nothing really much likely going to change on that. But usually it's the family changes more often than the law changes.
Yeah, and I would echo both of what Travis and Yolanda said. An Able account, I really go back to my case manager days, and when you write supports to help people with disabilities, write the plan that supports them, we visited it on a minimum requirement of annually, but people's lives change throughout the year. And it goes back to, what are your goals? What are your life events that are happening, and making sure that financially that you're prepared for that. Because financial and health, those are the 2 big areas for planning long-term, and it just necessitates a continuous involvement as your life unfolds.
Well, a big thank you to all of our panelists. Those are some great answers. Any quick final words on how our audience can reach you, or if they want to learn more information about any of the topics we discussed? I'll start with you, Doug. I know you're in Ohio, but if you wanted to, you just publicize where folks can reach you or learn more about the work you do.
Sure, I would encourage people to seek out whatever Able program they'd like to learn more about. If you're listening to this in the state of Florida, you have a state plan called Able United. We are a national plan, Stable Account. You can find us at stableaccount.com. We have customer service as well with a 1-800 number that picks up the phone. It's an awesome program that we love to answer people's questions and emails. So stableaccount.com would be the place to reach out to me if you have a question.
Yolanda Goodwin.
I posted in here my email and my website. Feel free to call me, text me, however it's easier. I also do these webinars all the time for groups. The Lighthouse for the Blind, I do this all the time, because getting people in one space to have a conversation where you have to be vulnerable isn't easy. But if this is something that you feel is helpful, I will do it 1,000 times to get the message out.
Thank you, Yolanda, for that offer and for your generosity to our community. Travis, to you, where can they find you?
My law office is in Clearwater, but I have an office in Tampa that I go to regularly as well. And I have actually been to each of your campuses and done talks to the families on everything from guardianship and guardian advocacy to estate planning to special needs trusts. My law firm is called Special Needs Lawyers, and you just put a .com at the end of that. specialneedslawyers.com is the name of my law firm. I also have on there a resources page that every time I do a speech or a presentation where I have materials, a PowerPoint or or just written materials, it's on there. So you can go back and look at a lot of other materials, and I think you can pick up a lot of information there. But always happy to help families put together that plan and make sure that their loved one is covered. So you can reach us through the law firm or probably even through Pepin. They have my contact information.
We do. Thank you, Travis. I want to thank you to all of our panelists and our attendees. I know your time is in constant demand for these virtual events, even in May of 2021. So we appreciate you taking some time with us. If you know of someone that couldn't join us today but would benefit from today's materials, please check our social media page on Facebook, Pepin Academies Foundation. Go to our website, pepinacademiesfoundation.org. Where you'll see this entire video uploaded shortly to our foundation website and to social media so that you can check back and send it out to anyone you know and share with any like-minded individuals or groups you think would be benefiting from this. We are happy to make this available. And we're able to do so as a result of our great sponsors and partners, RSA Consulting, Guardian Trust, and Long & Associates. Our next event will be in September of this year, Q3, and that will focus on legacy gifting. What does your family value the most? Are those values aligned across generations? And how do you ensure your family's wealth is utilized for your intended purposes? Find out how to make a lasting impact through legacy gifting. I know some of that was touched upon here, but we'll go into greater depth on our September event. And we do still have sponsorships available for the September event if you're interested in participating. So thank you to everyone. Have a great week, and we will see you next time.
Thanks, everybody.